Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Joe Evangelisto. He is the CISO over at NetSpy. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, thank you. How are you all doing today?
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Sure, yeah. So I've been in IT and now security in some shape or form for about 25 years. I spent my early part of my career as sysadmin, and then I worked my way up through managing teams, and then found my way into security. And now I'm on my third CISO role. So I've been doing CISO work probably for the past 6 years.
Very cool. And I would imagine you've had some responsibility as a CISO for hiring teams throughout the years?
I have, yeah. Now, one thing to keep in mind is I worked at smaller companies, right? So my needs for hiring as far as security goes are very different than, say, a larger enterprise that's hiring like for full SOC positions and things like that. So I have a very different, skill set I'm looking for and type of employee I'm looking for when looking at security employees.
Makes sense. Yeah, traditionally I've worked with a lot of startups, smaller companies as well, up to mid-sized consulting firms. Generally, not so much the giant ones. So I totally get it. I think when you're a smaller company, you tend to need to hire more generalists. People that can wear a lot of hats, be flexible, adapt on the fly, that sort of thing. I guess in your roles for these smaller organizations and hiring, have you encountered what we talk about as the talent gap, and do you think it's a real thing?
I have not encountered a talent gap myself specifically, but I do think it is a real thing, only in the sense that it's kind of a self-created issue. I think we as an industry have created for ourselves, and we haven't done ourselves any favors in solving the issue either. And I think most of that comes back to the idea that we still continue to be stuck in this idea that we have to hire someone with existing experience to do a job. And I think that's where we get ourselves in trouble. And we're not willing to take that step of actually, finding someone who's got the right personality, the right mindset, the right abilities, and train them for the role. And I think that's where we get ourselves. And that's fine. I think that's why we have a gap, right? It's not because there's not qualified individuals out there in the world or who could do the work. Is that we just aren't taking the time to actually give them that opportunity and train them.
Yeah, fair enough. What do you attribute your ability to, I guess, avoid the talent gap to? Is it just that ability or willingness of yours to train people, or is it something else?
I think it's more of that. And I will go back to, I'm a big believer in that idea of taking someone and training them up, because that's how I started, right? So I was very fortunate, when I was 19, I was working at a company and surprised I even got a job at a corporation at that point at 19, but I did. I was like an admin, right? So I'm just like a secretary, really. So I'm just typing reports and memos for this Department of Defense contract. And, IT guy left and they needed some help. So I just started helping out, right? And they saw that I had some talent for it, and they offered to kind of train me on the job and teach me. And I had a guy by the name of Kevin who took me under his wing and taught me stuff. And then in the process, I went to school and did a schooling thing at night, things like that, and got away. So I always have a soft spot, I guess, for people who maybe haven't had the same opportunities that others have had, right? Not everyone's lucky enough to go to school full time. Not everyone's lucky enough to have internships or opportunities provided to them that allow them to kind of get the experience they need to kind of get the job they want, their foot in the door. And so I try as much as I can. It's not always perfect, right? To try to give opportunities to people when they are available, right? And to give them that opportunity to learn and grow and get their start in a career, because that's how I started, right? So I feel that need to give back. I think it's important.
Yeah, totally agree. I kind of view the talent gap as more of a talent bottleneck. Some folks have heard me talk about this. We essentially have this gap at the senior individual contributor level, and then it kind of goes down after that. But when you're first trying to enter the field, you have these, always put the number, at least tens of thousands of people trying to break into the industry right now. And
Sure.
There's maybe only a handful, maybe 100 entry-level security jobs. What can we do with all those folks that are motivated, that do have home labs, that do have, foundational technology skills, that are ready for that shot? how do we get more of those people into the field? And if we can't get them all into the field, what do we do with them, I guess?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one problem we have is that too many of them want to start their career in security, and they're not willing to take a job in IT and then pivot in, right? And I think that's a problem because one, there's more IT jobs usually than security jobs in general. And two, I think by not having some of that background information, if you don't understand, how a company functions from a company level, how the IT works, on how systems are set up, how infrastructure is managed, things like that, you're really doing yourself a disservice and being able to understand, how then to better protect that said company, right? And to understand attack vectors and things like that, right? I think too many are trying to jump directly into that security role as opposed to taking a different path and being willing to learn other areas, which may be easier to get your foot in the door on and then pivot over later into that kind of role itself. And I think, again, that's something we can offer them. I don't think that's talked about enough, right? In the sense that you can go into security. It doesn't have to be your first job, right? It can be job number 3 or 4 or 5 or 10, right? There are other opportunities. And again, I think that additional background actually makes you a stronger candidate than just having, a certificate, right? Or just doing home labs, right? You actually then have tactical experience on how things actually function and work and how to then help make it more secure and address it.
Yeah, fair enough. I basically, that's the advice I give to people that are trying to break into the industry right now is, look, the market's saturated. You need to go where the jobs are. If there just aren't the security jobs right now, you need to be able to pivot. I think one challenge a lot of the candidates face is, look, I was sold this bill of goods by the certification company or the university or the boot camp, and they said, make $100K in 6 months. And they're saddled with all of this debt now because, they paid for all of this expensive training. And ultimately they have to make a certain wage, I guess, to make it all worth it, I guess. So
Sure.
I don't know that there's really a solution to that other than trying to adjust expectations with folks a little bit. Do you have any idea how we can do that on a larger scale versus just, one-on-one conversations like this?
Yeah, well, I think the industry as a whole is trying their hardest to try to dispel that myth of like boot camps are going to get you a job or certificates are going to get you a job. I think most security experts you talk to have really tried to, get that, that idea pushed out, right? And because I think most of us probably take the approach of like, hey, those certs they're nice, they're good to have. They may get you an interview, but they're not going to get you a job, right? They're going to get you maybe that talk, but that's it, right? It doesn't necessarily get you beyond that to a certain extent, right? And you're right, the boot camps and stuff, they're only hurting the industry because then people get burned and they get, upset, and rightfully so, right? They've been sold that bill, and that's not good. So I think we as industry need to continue to try to push those things out as best we can, right? But I think the only way we really do that is by providing an actual alternative that makes sense, right? So actually, I think there are options companies can do. So for example, my company actually has its own, what do we call, university, in which we, bring people on board, pay them a full-time salary, and then train them to become pen testers, right? There's no experience necessary. It's not like, oh, you have to do X, Y, or Z first. It's like, no, you apply, you show some aptitude, you show talent, or some information and knowledge. You get accepted. We're going to train you. We're going to teach you exactly what you need to do. And when you're done, you're going to be able to do the job, and then we're going to move you into doing work with us, right? And give you that kind of thing. And I think that is an option everyone has available to them that they're just not doing, right? It's an investment. Companies have to be willing to make that investment. When they do, the results are fantastic, right? You're now providing the industry with trained personnel who come in and can learn and grow from that experience, and then are also then essentially very thankful and appreciative that they will do the same, right? They're going to go out and be evangelists for your company or for the, the community, and provide those opportunities to others as well, right? It's that whole, that giving keeps going down the train as well. So I think those are the kind of things that we need to start to do, kind of more like a trade school kind of approach to security. And we just need to make those options more available.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people would say that sounds great in theory, or, from I guess, an altruistic standpoint that, we're doing the industry a lot of good. I think often the pushback then, though, is, in my particular case, it doesn't make sense. We need to hire, these super senior roles specifically for, our particular situation. We don't have the budget to invest in these long-term talent pipelines, that sort of thing. Do you think there's any solution to that, or is that kind of unsolvable problem for some companies?
I mean, I think there's always those instances where, you have a specific thing you have to address, and you don't have the time to spend on training someone up, right? I think those are always going to exist, and it's never going to change. I think that's true in every industry, whether that be security, IT, marketing, whatever, right? You don't always have that opportunity to bring someone and train them up into that field, and that's going to happen, right? And I don't think there's any way to really solve that. I don't think you have to solve that per se. But I do think we do have to just be more realistic about, is that truly the position we're in or not? And I think sometimes we convince ourselves that's what we have to do when it's really not what we have to do. It's just easier, right? And we're going to take the easiest path forward, right? And not the hard one. And I think that's where we end up. So, I'm not knocking anybody. Everyone has their own challenges at their company, their own things they have to solve, their own, issues they have to address. And everyone has to choose what's best for them and their roles and what they're trying to accomplish. But I do think it's important that we actually think through it a little bit and really, ask ourselves, is it truly what we actually have to have and need? Or can I look at different alternatives, or different options that give us, maybe more candidates or cheaper candidates, honestly, right? Those super senior guys, they're great, or girls, but they're expensive. They come at a price. And then the other problem you have oftentimes is they're good for a year, maybe two, before they are bored and ready to move on, because they came because they wanted a challenge. They had a challenge, the challenge been solved, now they're ready to go. Right? So now you're in this revolving door, and I'm not sure how much that's helping you out. That's expensive too, right? Recruiting is not cheap, right? So I think too often we focus on the short-term need instead of the long-term, benefit.
It's so interesting you mentioned short-term versus long-term. I was just thinking that as you were talking there. I think when you look at it from a medium to long-term perspective, building a training program makes a lot more sense. But if you're focused on the short term, that it's going to take time and money in the immediate short term that you're not going to see the benefits of until, some point in the future. And I think that's a larger problem in business overall right now is, sure. We have to look at our profitability today and not 2 years from now. And I think some of that comes from the fact that people just aren't sticking around in companies as long anymore. There's, I often talk about how there's really no investment anymore from the employers in the employees, and then, likewise from the employees into the employers. And people aren't getting pensions anymore. They feel like they're just a number on a balance sheet. And if, as soon as the economy goes south or something goes wrong within the company, layoffs are the first thing on everybody's mind. Sure. What can we do about that, I guess, on an individual, team or organization level to help people feel valued and ensure that they're going to stick around for a little longer maybe than the average?
Sure. Yeah, no, and you're right. It definitely has to start at the top, right? From executives on down, they have to buy into that idea that we want people here for the long term, right? We're not here for short-term solutions. We're here for long-term, employees who want to be here. So culture matters, right? Culture is a huge thing that does matter to a company to allow that to happen. and I get it, right? I've been in jobs where I felt like a commodity instead of an employee, was valued, right? So we've all been in those roles. That's not any fun to be in. So definitely something to look for. But I do think at a manager level, that's important for you. So it's important for me. So to make sure my employees don't feel that way, and to make sure I'm also looking out for them. And honestly, one of the first things I can do, and it's kind of silly, is to make sure I don't overhire, right? If I hire too many people, then when the company has struggles, the first thing that's going to happen is I'm now cutting those people, right? So you have to find that balance of making sure you're hiring for what you actually truly need, not just for this moment, but it's also still going to be needed 6 months, a year, or 2 years down the road. So you're actually hiring for current and future needs, not just to get over this hump, right? If you just need to get over the hump, get a contractor, get someone in for 6 months, right? Because otherwise, you're right. When the company hits a financial hardship or has a downturn, that's the first thing that happens. First one in, last one in, first one out, right? Kind of mentality. So, it does mean sometimes running a little leaner than maybe you feel comfortable with. But I think that's important because then you can always show that there is value to this person being here, right? And there's no fat to cut. So I think it's the first piece there. I think the other thing that's important is making sure the person employed feels tied back. Their job is tied back to what the company is doing, right? Whatever it is, you're building widgets, you're creating software, whatever it is, that services you're offering, they need to understand how what they're doing makes a difference in that work, right? It helps protect it, helps move it forward, helps sales and whatever. And I think oftentimes we do a horrible job of helping people understand that, like, this little project you're working on, this little thing actually has a value that helps, create this foundation for this other thing that the company then relies upon to then become successful, right? And then we also then do a good job of then, selling it up the chain as well. It's like, hey, look, this role matters because without this, you couldn't do X. And without X, you ain't selling, right? It's all about that tie back, and we need to make sure that tie back is happening. So my role sits in that level there too. I have to both, embellish, get my team to understand that value, and also get my management to understand that value at both sides of it. So I got to sit on both sides of that fence there.
Yeah, so you're kind of selling above you and selling below you in a way. It's kind of similar to what us recruiters are doing. We're selling the candidate to the company, and we're selling the company to the candidate. And you really need to make sure that both sides are on the same page. And ultimately, you're limited in what you can do at the end of the day. You have to do the best you can with the information that you have and the information that you're able to share, especially as a leader within a company. You're not able to share everything. But to your point, yeah, I think being able to paint the picture for folks of how their contribution trickles up, just as, when you talk to the executives, how things trickle down, painting that picture about how they're not just this small, tiny little cog in a machine, and there's all of this opacity, where they don't really understand their connection to the overall mission or goal of the company. People do like to feel like their work has meaning, that their lives have meaning, I guess, on a deeper level.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, money's only going to get you so far, right? I mean, I guarantee you pay someone, they'll stay a little longer, but at some point they're going to forget that you just paid them more, and they're going to be right back where they were, right? Value is highly underrated. People need to feel valued. They want to feel valued in their job. They want to feel like they're making a difference. We just do, right? I mean, very few people can function well without that, right? They want to feel appreciated. They want to feel like they're doing some work that is helping something in some way, shape, or form move things forward. And security is ripe with that, right? We have so much that we do that actually helps the company protect it and allow things to function in a way. And we just always do a good job of, talking through that and showing that, right? And I think that is a fault of the managers in security, less so than the employees of security, right? So.
Well, and we often end up talking about that idea on the podcast about how your job as a security executive really is tying security outcomes to business outcomes, and somehow linking revenue generation. I think for consulting firms, MSSPs, product companies where their new hires are either a direct or indirect path to more revenue, that's a pretty easy sell when you're looking at, building a training program or something like that. Whereas, if you're a large corporation and you're hiring an internal security team, that discussion can be a lot more difficult because you're viewed as a cost center. Any tips to the, I guess, security executives out there at these corporations that need to build internal security teams, how they can use their security posture and what they're doing as a business enabler?
That's a really good question. And I think the first thing you have to do is you definitely have to understand what it is that's going to drive the business forward. What does the business actually want from you and need from you? And then I think you then have to, break that down in a way that then helps you, provide that back to your employees so they can provide it back up, right? So again, it goes back to the whole idea of employees understand why they're there and what they're supposed to accomplish, and business has to provide guidance on how that all lines up to provide value overall, right? So that's why it's really important that you're always constantly communicating about what's happening in the business as a whole. What new companies have you sold to? What new products are you offering? What new things are happening or occurring within the roles? What new departments are spinning up and who's doing what there, and providing that information back to the employees. I think there's a lack of communication because we think we tell them what they need to know, but we tell them this much information when they really need this much information, right? And it kind of goes back to your point, which is it's important that we tell them everything we're allowed to tell them, right? Always there's things you can't say, right? But then otherwise, why hold back on information? It doesn't help at all, right? So I would encourage other leaders to really be as open with communication as possible about everything. Share it all. Why hold it back? It's not going to help you at all. It definitely doesn't help them. And you'd be surprised when you do that, the ideas that come and the additional, thoughts that occur to them on how to make something better or make improvements or things like that. And we tend to give them what we think, they just need this little bit of information. And we silo them off, and it doesn't help anything. So we really need to kind of open that floodgate and just throw it all at them, right? Give them everything they're allowed to hear, and then let them, use that to help, make better choices and put better processes in place and things like that.
Yeah, I think sometimes as leaders, folks feel like they know best, and the team members maybe don't know what to do with the extra information, or they won't, if they were given said information. But you never know what little piece of info can spark some sort of new thought or innovation in somebody, especially that's, creatively minded. And so many people I talk to as a recruiter, they're looking to leave their company for reasons like that, where they have no idea what corporate's doing. They've heard rumors of acquisitions or whatever, but they don't know how it's going to shake out. They've had these great ideas that their boss just won't listen to and won't give them a reason as to why. It's like, yeah, of course you can't take every suggestion that your employees give you, but you can at least provide somebody a reasoning, as to why, and thank people for those ideas. I think once you squash an idea or two for your team and don't provide a good reason, you're very unlikely to get future ideas. So
yeah, absolutely. And you're right. The most important part of that, whether to your employees or to your internal customers or whatever else, it's that why. Why are we doing this? Why are we not doing this? Why is this occurring? That why is so important. People don't understand that reasoning behind it. So if you're talking to your employee and they come up with an idea and you talk, you realize it's just not going to work. You need to explain to them why it's not going to work, why it may not function properly, or what could be done instead. Right? You need to talk that through with them, because then they'll understand next time. It's not that he hated my idea or thought I was stupid or whatever. It's like, there was a reason why we didn't move forward with that, right? Because it didn't, provide the value you wanted to, or was too expensive, or something like that, right? And just as much, it's important for your internal customers, like when you make a new security policy. Well, why are we making a security policy? What's important? Why are we doing this, right? We totally undersell the value of providing that information across the board, whether it's to our employees, to our executives, whatever. We just don't give enough of that why behind decisions and things, reasonings and such. And when you don't do that, it also opens them up to they start to get wild ideas, right? When you don't know, your brain will just start spinning, right? And it's like, and you get these wild conjectures, conspiracy theories are spinning off and things like that. And it's just, but if you just actually shared more of that information, you wouldn't be in that situation. We'd be in a boat, and they'd actually be much more comfortable and happy than they are.
It's so funny. As you were saying that, I was thinking the exact same thing. Where there's ambiguity, anxiety inevitably ensues. People are not comfortable with the unknown. So the more unknowns you give them, the more their minds are going to fill in the blanks. And it's not always going to be maybe what you would want them thinking. So
exactly. And then trying to undo that is always way harder. It's always way harder, because now it seems like you're just saying that to get them not to think that way. It's like, that's not really what it's like. It's so hard to unwind that. So yeah, it's always best just kind of share openly and honestly with that kind of information.
Yeah, for sure. What about on the hiring front? You mentioned that you haven't necessarily had a ton of challenges in that area. are there any challenges that you've encountered over the years that were kind of recurring or kind of stood out to you as something that other people might be experiencing?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge I run into is it sometimes is with the people I'm talking to on the interview process, right? Which is, and again, it reflects the industry as a whole, I think, is by the time I'm talking to them, I'm probably their like 20th or 30th interview, right? They're burned out on the interview. They're burned out on the questions, right? So they've answered to like, tell me about yourself. And this is like their 30th time they've had to say it. So they have zero excitement, right? They're just kind of going through the motions at times. And the last thing I want to do is hire someone who doesn't want to be here, right? If you don't want to be at my company, you have no excitement to be here, you're not showing any interest, like, then why am I bringing you on, right? I want someone to join me because they're excited about the opportunity, they're excited about the role and all that, right? But I also get it from the other side of it. Again, a lot of times they've gone through so many rounds of this, and in between those rounds, they've been ghosted, they've been ignored, they've been told no with no feedback, right? So I understand why it occurs, but that's probably the biggest challenge I have is I can't tell sometimes when I'm talking to these individuals, are they truly not interested or are they just burned out? And I just don't know. And you're trying to suss that out in a 30-minute or an hour interview, and that's really difficult, right? And I think that's the hardest part of interviewing, which is you're trying to make a decision about someone's role at your company you're hoping to keep there for years in this much time, right? And you're hoping that your gut's right, you're hoping you're asking the right questions, you're hoping they didn't have a bad morning or they aren't other things as well, because so many factors affect that interaction, right? So much that you could totally misread somebody just because, that morning they got up and they spilled coffee themselves and just kind of like the whole day just started going off ramp, right? And if that happened, maybe you'd have gotten a different response to your question, maybe a little more enthusiasm, different answer, right? So that to me is what I run into the most often, and that's really hard to figure out. I think that's the hardest part for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a post on LinkedIn not long ago talking about how the Socratic method could be used in hiring. Basically, the idea that you just ask as many questions as you possibly can to get to the roots behind somebody's thought or belief or whatever it may be. I think that why that you mentioned earlier is super important on the candidate side. You want to know why somebody's not satisfied in their current role, not just that they're dissatisfied, but why is it? And digging past the surface, which I do as a recruiter. I think it's super important to suss these things out on the front end so that you get somebody into the interview process, they're a fit for the role before they talk to the hiring manager, or at least they're a high likelihood to be a fit. And I think an effective recruiter should be generating excitement with that candidate too, so that by the time they get to the hiring manager, there's less ambiguity. They've gotten some of their initial questions answered. They have a good sense of the company's culture and things like that. Obviously, I understand in smaller companies, that's not always the case, where you don't necessarily have a seasoned or any recruiting team sometimes on the front end to do that sort of thing. But I think a lot of these concerns can be addressed just by, not taking the first answer that somebody gives you as the gospel, but, asking some follow-up questions, just like a conversation. And, my favorite hiring managers over the years, I'm thinking of one guy in particular. He ran a DFIR firm. He would talk to somebody for, I think, an hour, the first round, and then they would do one more call, usually an hour, half hour, and then they would make a hiring decision. And both of those calls were very conversational. It wasn't an interrogation. It wasn't like a formal Q&A. It was more get to know somebody on a human level, ask those follow-up questions. Don't just follow a rote set of questions that they've heard a million times. And I think that way you kind of tend to get the best out of people if, you treat them. It's not like you're not lording power over them per se, but it's more about approaching it more conversationally and talking to somebody on their level versus, feeling like they're a step below you or something like that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agreed, right? And it all comes to how you approach the conversation in the first place, what questions you're asking, and your tone you take, right? I think those are all very important. I think the hardest part about that, though, is we've been trained that in an interview, you're going to be asked a question, you give an answer. You're going to be asked a question, you give an answer. when you try to have a conversational interview, it's very different, and most don't know how to function in it. They're like, you asking opening questions, they almost like don't know what to do, right? They just kind of will just sit there and look at you like, I think I've answered your question. Next question, please, right? They're just, you know, but we've done it to ourselves, right? We got them used to the idea that I'm going to ask you these 10 questions, you'll have these 10 answers, and I will judge your fate based on those things, which is just ridiculous. And you're right, you almost have to kind of take the conversation where it leads you, right? And I've done a bunch of round of interviews recently, right? And it was interesting when I was talking to some of the candidates, there were like there's only one, I think, out of the last 7 I talked to, where we actually had a conversation. We just chatted and talked and went back and forth, right? And I thought it was great. It was one of the first ones I've had in a long time. Really good. But everyone else was like, we're trying to talk to them, and they give you an answer, and they just sit there, and you could tell they weren't going to say anything until you asked your next question. And you're like, we just talked. And it was like, they're totally uncomfortable with that approach. I don't know how we fix that, right? Because, 9 times out of 10, most of the conversations they're going to have are going to be that way. So they don't know how to prep for something that's not that. They know how to prep for these 10 questions, right? So it makes it hard.
Yeah. The only thing I could think would be set expectations as clearly as you possibly can. Whoever talks to that person in that first phone call, assuming, you're the second call, have them kind of set up the next call by saying, look, really, this next call is more of a, conversation, should be free flowing, don't feel like you need to, stick to that standard Q&A format. And I think that's probably more likely to get the best out of people. I think another thing that you could do, kind of like it's actually technically a sales tactic, I believe, but is to do some rapport building at the very beginning of the call, where, it's more of an informal question just to get the thoughts flowing, to get somebody talking and comfortable and kind of in the right headspace. I think it can be somewhat of a science, but probably more of an art. I feel like so much of hiring is a combination of both on the recruiting front end, as well as, holding interest throughout. What are your thoughts on like structuring, I guess, the hiring and onboarding process? Do you believe in a real formal structure, or do you want to, keep it a little bit more relaxed?
I try to keep it a little more like I try not to put someone through tons of interviews, because I've been there, right? We've all been there where you're like, I'm on interview number 7, and I don't know when this is ever going to end, and I don't know how many people I have to talk to. It's like, I definitely don't want to do that. So, mine are pretty simple, which is, the way we usually take it is, the first calls with the hiring manager for a half hour, just to have touch base, like just get a feel for the person, like have some initial conversation, get an idea whether they feel like they're a good match for the culture, for, the way we function and work as a team, and so forth, right? Checks out. Then we have the more, I guess, traditional, technical interview kind of thing, where they meet with the team, and we try to suss out, where the team tries to suss out their technical skills and ability. Like, can they actually do the job, right? Is the resume a good reflection of their skills and abilities? Is it a lie? Is it not a lie? Is it actually underselling what they can do, right? Because you never know, right? These kind of things. So, and then there's just one more, which is with me usually, and it's just, what I tell everyone when I get on the phone is like, look, this is not a technical conversation. I'm going to ask you 0 technical questions. This is us talking, so I can get a understanding whether you're a good fit for our culture here, if you're a good fit for the company as a whole and how we function, if you're good for my team. And what I always tell them is, a job is like a marriage, right? You both have to want to be in this, and for the right reasons. Otherwise, it's not going to work, right? So it has to work for both of us. So I encourage them to ask me questions. Like, whatever you want to know. Company, me, team, it's all on the table, right? I want you to feel comfortable. And if it takes longer than the half hour we have, I'm happy to extend it, right? So that's kind of what I try to do, right? So I guess it's a bit of a mix of both. And I try, my role, as I see it, like I said, is really to help ensure that the person we're bringing on is not going to rock the boat, in the sense of like, I have a team that's cohesive and works well together and runs well together. We have a company culture that focuses on things like collaboration and innovation and delivery, right? So I need to make sure this person can, meet those things and is going to, jive with that kind of environment. So I'm just trying to make sure the personality is a good match for us more than anything else. And that's kind of the approach I take. So I try to keep it a little bit more relaxed, because that's how you start to see the true person, right? When they're all uptight and nervous and they're sitting there very rigid, like that's not who you're talking to, right? So you need to try to, like, get them to breathe a little bit, take a breath, right? So, and one of the things I'll do is when I get on the call with somebody, if I can see immediately they're just nervous and just really tense, right? I'll usually just ask them an off-the-wall question, and just to get them to loosen up and laugh a little bit, and it usually changes. I think my latest one is like, what's the weirdest food you've eaten recently? Did you like it? And it just has nothing to do with the job, right? But it gets them to go, oh, and they just have to like stop and think because they weren't expecting it, and gets them to kind of just breathe a little bit, And the other thing I always try to encourage them is like, look, this is not a formal interview. You don't have to wear a shirt and tie. Just come as who you are, like, and we'll just have a conversation, because oftentimes so many of us have worn a shirt and tie in so long that when we do, we actually can't breathe. We don't know how to act. We feel, it actually induces more anxiety, right? So that's what I try to do. And it's like anything in life, sometimes you're successful at it, sometimes you're not. Just do the best you can.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned reducing anxiety. I think the best thing you can do in an interview process is to reduce as much anxiety as you can in order to get the best possible version of somebody, versus almost trying to trip somebody up, which is a pretty common tactic I've noticed. A lot of case studies that are ambiguous, and you have to kind of figure out what you think the hiring team might be looking for, stuff like that. I've encountered that far more often than not. But yeah, I think the perfect hiring process is a combination of flexibility, but having a formal process, because people do appreciate structure and they like to know what to expect. So, to your point about, 3-ish rounds, I think that's about the sweet spot. 2-3 rounds, lay it all out for somebody in that first initial recruiter screen, or whoever talks to them first. So I'll send somebody, after I talk to them, a summary email about, link to the website of the company, job description, link to the hiring manager's LinkedIn profile to go back to, transparency from earlier, just a quick blurb about next steps. And then if there's any sort of benefit sheet or anything like that, share that up front. I think the more information you can give somebody on the front end, the more likely they are to be excited going into that next round, and the easier it's going to be to keep them engaged, throughout the whole process. And if they're interested, and you get a sense that they're interested, then you're more likely to want to be a little bit flexible if they have a crazy schedule or something like that. Sure. And it's, to you, then it's not as much of a sign of disinterest as they're genuinely being extremely busy. So, yeah.
And let's be honest, like, you could do everything right and you can still have a misstep. You can still hire someone and you get them on board and you're like, this is not who I expected or what I'm getting. And then that's unfortunate, right? I mean, you're never perfect at doing this. And I think we have to be honest with that as well, right? There's always going to be opportunities where you think you've hired the right candidate and you get them on board and you realize they were not the right candidate and you made a mistake, and you just have to rectify that. And quickly, honestly, because it's not fair to them or you to kind of, be in a situation where you've mishired and now you feel like you're stuck, right? So that's always problematic as well. Not that it happens often, but it can, right? None of us are perfect in our processes and our view of, the people we're talking to. So.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a hiring decision is a calculated risk, and you try and reduce as many of the risks as you can, but you're never going to fully eliminate risk. And I don't know if you would want to. I guess, have you encountered that situation before? It sounds like maybe you have. Any lessons learned from when that happened?
Yeah, I mean, we I definitely encountered it before. Like I said, not often, right? I'm doing this for a while, and I've been pretty lucky, and usually I find the right candidates. So I'll take it as luck more than good, because I'd rather be lucky than good, right? But yeah, I think, what I learned was when we basically, I went back to the teams and looked, all right, what did we get wrong here? Like, what did we not do? Did we not ask questions? And what we found was that, we just essentially misread the person, right? We made some assumptions based on, the nonverbals and verbal feedback we were getting that we read for one way, and it was actually the opposite, right? And we just, and we accounted for like, oh, they were really nervous. So we put a lot more on the nervous side than maybe we should have, right? And and so forth. So, it was just some bad assumptions on our part that led to just a bad hire, right? At the end of the day, when we cut ties, the person we cut ties with, they were not surprised, is what I will say. I think they also felt like this is not a good fit for me either, right? And I think that's often true, right? I think usually when you're thinking this is not good, they're also like, this isn't good. Like I'm not supposed to be here, right? Kind of thing. I think you just have to be honest about it and own it and go forward. Like anything in life, and I tell my team all the time, which is, when you make a mistake, you got to own it. You own it. You learn from it, and you move on and you grow from it. And that's what we did. So.
Yeah, well, and if it does come as a surprise to somebody, you've done something wrong, and I've seen that happen as well, where somebody will be let go. People that I'm very close to, that's happened to, and if it's a huge surprise and there was no expectation setting, there was no performance improvement plan, there was no sense to the person that they were doing something wrong, then you failed in your duty, I think, as an employer. And it's a two-way street. Obviously, the employee has responsibilities and expectations they need to hit, but I think so do employers. I think there's a lot of folks these days feeling, I don't know, used, disillusioned by companies with all the layoffs and things happening like that. How do you ensure? You'd mentioned culture earlier. How do you ensure an effective team culture when people are, I guess, skeptical going into any sort of employer-employee relationship? And what do you look for in culture fit in folks?
So, I mean, for me, like we talked about before, it really is all about that communication piece, right? It's so important for them to understand. So, like when someone new comes on board, one of the things I'll do is I'll sit down with them and talk to them. Like, hey, like my team has a set of values. Like the company has a set of values, but I also have a set of values for my own team. Like this is what I expect from my team. So I talk to people about it during the interview process, but then I reiterate it when they join. It's like, hey, look, just so we know, like here's what we expect, right, up front, right? These are the values we have. This is what we expect from you, and so forth, right? So I do try to do my best to make sure we communicate that early, right, and set that kind of expectations early, right, as far as what we expect from them and how they act and interact and do things as well, right? But the other thing I try to do is, so for my direct reports, I have my normal one-on-ones, right, on a weekly basis, like most of us do. But I also have a monthly, what I call development meeting. It has nothing to do with the one-on-ones. It's all about how's your career going? How are you feeling about things? Do you need some help in training? Like it's about career development, and it's about helping them essentially fill out their resume, right, and get better and move forward, right? Because at the end of the day, if I don't help them, well, someone else will, right? I mean, that's the way it works. We all want to get better at our jobs and potentially move up, and I want to be able to help them with that, rather than them feel like they're not getting it, so they're going to find someone else who will give it, right? So, so I try very much hard to do that. I encourage my managers to do the same thing with their employees, right? To have those ongoing meetings. But I also have monthly 30-minute meetings with all of my non-direct reports. So as well, and it's just that tell them like that's your time. Ask me whatever you want. Any questions you have, any concerns, any issues, any problems. Like I'm here to help make sure you always feel comfortable with what's happening, either in the team or the company or the role or whatever, right? Or whatnot. And some take advantage of it, and some don't, right? Some I've had one who's taking advantage of it is he wants to be mentored a little bit. So great, uses a mentoring time period. Like here's what I've learned in my 25 years, and try to provide that back to them, right? But I think it's about that. It's about that being that openness of communication, that openness of being able to help people grow in their careers, and to become better employees, and so forth. And I think it's so important. I think we put so much value on technical knowledge. We don't put enough value on the business skills, right? Knowing how to talk to people, knowing how to communicate with people, knowing how to write emails, knowing how to write a report, writing how to, those kind of things. We undersell that. And so I try to make sure I spend time doing that, because it also helps build that rapport and build that, that feeling across the company and the team. And that way the team as a whole hopefully feels like they can bring up anything and we'll talk through it, right? It's not going to be like, oh, shouldn't have said that, right? We should be willing to open to talk through any situation, scenario, or problem, and figure it out, then we should be able to work on it as a group and get through it. So I try to, very much try to incorporate a very open, communication, open flowing kind of environment.
Awesome. Yeah. And you mentioned a lot about training there. Specific, though, I guess, to the business skills, is that something that you kind of teach yourself, or is that something that you outsource? How do you get folks that sort of knowledge?
I tend to do it more myself. And usually it's not necessarily a specific, like, hey, we're going to have a 1 hour session on this, right? It's more kind of point in time as it happens. It's like, oh, look, we want to make this purchase. Okay. Well, we need to make a business case to the CFO on why we want to make this. So we're going to sit down and work through that, right? So never done one before, great. We're going to learn, right? We're going to learn how to outline this, how to make your case, how to provide that information to them, what to expect, that kind of thing, right? Hey, we need to do, communication around a new project, right? We need to make sure we have a project plan that actually talks about how we're going to communicate these changes to our employees. And you're going to write the emails. Oh, you've never done it before? Great. You're going to give it a shot. I'll give you feedback, right? So it's all about just taking what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and then leveraging that to help them learn those skills as they go, right? And I've had, or the other one is, like, if you're a manager, you never managed before, and you have an employee you're having some issues with, great. You're going to learn how to, work with that employee. You're going to learn how to give them feedback, right? And hopefully you don't have to do this, but if you have to, you're going to learn how to do a PIP, right? And put them a performance improvement plan and hopefully have that, turn around. So there's lots of opportunities to learn and help your employees learn. You just have to take advantage of them, right? It's anyone who's a parent knows that, like, you don't wait till a week later to yell at your kid for something they did at that moment, or you deal with it at that moment. You train them at that moment. It's like, oh, you need help? Let me teach you now how to tie your shoe. Oh, you hit the dog? Let me tell you why you don't hit the dog, right? Like, just, you kind of have to deal with things as they come. And I think in a lot of ways, management's no different, right? You need to take advantage of every moment you have to use as a lesson, to improve people and make them better employees and better people.
For sure. Someone out there might say, boy, it sounds like you're investing a lot in your employees. You're sending them the training, you're doing all this mentorship on an ongoing basis. All of that stuff, especially I think the business skills, you're making your employees way, way more marketable. Those are skills that will serve them for their entire careers. What do you say to the person that's afraid of those folks leaving because they've, developed all of these skills and you've done so much investment in these people?
Well, I mean, I think, as you noted earlier, right, most people don't stay in jobs very long anymore, right? So the way I look at it is you have two options, which is you can help them learn and grow, and become better at their jobs and make them ready for that next, jump in their career, and hope they stay and hope they find value at it and they'll stay and they'll move on and they'll stay with you longer. Or they'll leave. And if they leave, hopefully leave on good terms and they'll want to come back, right? What you don't want is someone leaving and be upset, right? Didn't enjoy the time there. Didn't like working here. Boss was a jerk. Didn't help me learn at all, right? That doesn't help you as an employer either, right? It just makes you look bad. You don't get good candidates because it's going up on Glassdoor, right? Let's be honest. And we all look at it when we're looking at places. That doesn't do you any good either, right? I think I very much believe in what you call karma or whatever you want to call it, but I think you get what you put out into the world, right? So I think it's important. Like I said earlier, I've been very fortunate in my entire career. I've had, moments where people have given back to me and provided me information, opportunities that they didn't have to, right? It was providing them no benefit, and it made me a better employee, a better person, helped me in my career. So I feel very, very much so that I should do the same. I feel obligated in a sense, I guess, that I should do the same, because I wouldn't be where I am without those opportunities and those mentorships and those people in my life. And so I want to make sure I'm having that same impact on my employees. And the payoff for me is normally they will stay longer, right? And if they don't, even when they're there, they're better employees, right? They're nicer, they're easier to work with, they'll put in more effort, right? You don't have to deal with problems as much, you don't have to talk to them as much, right? It just becomes a much easier relationship, right? And I spend enough time at work that I want our time at work to be easy, right? So if it helps make my life easier, why not? Why not help that employee get better and give myself an easier time at work than if I'm always having to fight with someone over stuff. That is not what I want, right? It just makes the day long, makes you grumpy when you get off at night, right? And it just doesn't make anything better. We spend far too much time at work not to enjoy ourselves, in what we do.
For sure, yeah. So there's almost two different types of benefits to that approach. You have the altruistic benefit, and that you're helping people advance their careers, but then there's also the quote unquote selfish benefit as well. And I think the best strategies and management styles take advantage of both of those, those ideas. Well, we're actually coming up on time, so Joe. So just one last question for you: is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Oh boy, that's good. I think we're still, I think like you mentioned earlier, I think there's still far too much focus on certifications, right? Even though we're trying to essentially, you make it so you don't have to go to those boot camps to get a job, though, it's still like every job description's got them listed. Everything is still hyper focused on, well, do you have your Security Plus? Do you have your CISP? Do you have this? Do you have that? It's like, oh my goodness, right? And I think we're truly doing ourselves a disservice. And I think here's why, which is I think one of the areas of the market we miss when we do that is you're going to have a significant number of people, probably more than we realize, who are terrible test takers, right? They're going to just bomb every certificate test they go in to take. And why is that? Is because they don't know the material? Usually not, right? It's usually because they have test anxiety, they have other issues to prevent them from actually testing. And so now you have a large group of people you've just ignored because they don't have a cert. Well, sorry, you don't have a cert, you don't get your foot in the door. Well, it's just silly, right? And I think we need to fix that, right? We need to start focusing on, capabilities and abilities, and not, degrees and certs, right? And it's always interesting. Everyone likes to throw, people who are like, oh, they got their CEO of a company, they never got their degree or whatever. It's like, but then we go to hire people for that company and require they have a degree and certificates. It's like, it doesn't seem right. So I think we really need to kind of root that out and figure out a way to actually focus on capabilities and abilities of somebody, and went off that. And again, the most important part still, I think, is cultural fit for the company. You can have someone who's highly skilled, but if they don't meet the way your culture, your company is, and what they expect, it's never going to work. And they'll be short-lived, and they'll be out the door, and you'll be frustrated, and you'll be back looking again. So we need to start looking at that more.
For sure. Yeah. And I guess from a recruiting standpoint, my take on why I think the credentials become so important in the job description creation process, and then when going out and looking for people, I think in a lot of cases recruiters just don't know what else to look for. So they'll default to acronyms, because it's easier to look for. It jumps out on the page, and it's something that's tangible that you can view on somebody's resume. The problem with a lot of these intangibles is they're exactly that, and you don't necessarily get a sense for those when you're scanning through thousands of resumes.
It is absolutely hard. And like, look, I don't envy anybody who has to try to get their foot in the door today. Like I admit, I still feel very fortunate that I started when I did, because it was a different world 25 years ago or so, right? So, which is why I will still say the most important thing someone can do for a new job, any job at any level, is use your network, right? Leverage the people who know you, who can speak to your intangibles, because that's such an important factor, right? Almost always the best people I've hired have come from recommendations from them. Like, oh, I value John. John is a great employee. He's recommending, Jenny over here. I definitely got to talk to Jenny. She must be great if John likes her, right? That kind of thing. I think we don't leverage that enough. And I don't think people who are looking for jobs understand how powerful that is. I got my current job, right, as a CISO because of connections I had, right? Not because I had my CSSP and I had my MBA and my degrees and everything else. And my first interview had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with the fact that I had connections here, and they wanted to talk to me. So it continues to pay dividends no matter what level you're at. And we don't, I think people undervalue that a lot.
Well, and that could be part of the curriculum. and I don't think it is, but when teaching people how to break into the industry, nobody seems to teach folks how to network, how to meet CISOs like yourself and get mentors and stuff like that. So that's maybe something to explore for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they also don't teach them that honestly, like the biggest driving force to getting hired is somebody liking you, right? I mean, if you're likable, if people want to work with you, you'll almost always have a job, right? I mean, and I don't mean to say that flippantly, right? I know there are people who are right now out of work and struggling, and they're nice people, right? I'm not trying to say that, but I'm just saying, but in general, right? When networking matters because you leave an impression on somebody, then they want to help you. Like, oh, this person, I like this person, they're a good person, I know them, I want to help them, right? Find a job or get work or remember them for a position or whatever, right? So that's where the networking really plays in. I think we don't understand what networking really is. Really, what networking is it's almost like they're like business friendships, right? I'm not friends in the sense we're going to hang out every weekend, but we're friends in the sense that you remember who I am, and then when I need assistance with something, you're willing to help me. And it goes both ways, right? Whether it's finding a job or answering questions or whatever, right? It's that being willing to help each other. And I think that altruism, pays off. Again, whether you call it karma or whatever, right? When you put good stuff out, good stuff usually will come back to you in some way, shape, or form later in life.
Absolutely. Well, if people want to reach out to you or keep up with the work that you do, how would they do so?
LinkedIn's always the best way. I don't post often, but when I do, I try to make it worthwhile. So but they're welcome to reach out to me there, connect with me there. I'm happy to have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Joe. Thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.